In the last lecture, we learned how to store the token. Let's now use it. We need it on that dashboard page for the outgoing request there. If we have a look at our dashboard.view file, it's this GET request which requires the token. First of all, I want to move that request into an action too. So in my store.js file, I'll add a third action next to login and dashboard. And here I will simply name that fetch user. You can name it whatever you want. There we will get this context object where we can get the commit method out of it. And inside the action, I will use Axios to get my user. We have to be careful here. The Axios instance I import in the store.js file actually is the Axios auth instance, which is the wrong one for fetching user data. Now, to be even more precise, another problem we will face is that here I got some user data on Firebase on that URL I want to reach out to in fetch user due to an earlier module where we added Axios. Right now, when signing up, however, we never store something in our Firebase database. We only sign a user up and that gets stored in some other database. So there are two things I want to do before we can use our token. The first is when we sign a user up, once we did successfully sign up in the then block, I want to dispatch another action and also store user data in the Firebase database and not just in the Firebase Authentication database to which we have no access. The second thing I want to do is then fetch the user. And for both storing and fetching user data outside of the Firebase Authentication world, we need to set a different base URL. We import the wrong Axios instance, so to say. Well, that's no problem. We can still import the main Axios instance too. I'll name it global Axios from Axios. You can give it any name you want. And now global Axios is the Axios instance I will use for storing and fetching user data. Let's start with storing. I want to do this once we did sign up, and I will quickly create a new action store user. There I want to extract the commit method like this. And in store user, I will use my global Axios instance, send a post request, send it to, now we need that URL we have in the main.js file here. That's automatically used as a starting URL. So now I only need to reach out to /users.json, as we did earlier, as we did at the beginning of this module too. So I now post my data here. The data I do want to post is data I expect to get here passed to this store user action. So I'll name it user data here, and I just want to pass it on. And then here we can also add a then block where I console log the response and a catch block for potential errors. So console log the error. Now this action should be dispatched when we actually get the user data. So once we did authenticate. The good thing is this context object where we pull out commit also has the dispatch method as a property. So we can pull this out too. And once we did authenticate, so in this then block, I can not only commit our mutation because I can set the token, the user is authenticated at this point of time. I can also dispatch store user, so this other action here, and pass on my user data. So I will simply pass on a JavaScript object where I want to pass all the user data we have. And here I will simply pass on auth data. That's the data I receive from my signup.view file. And here auth data is basically this object. Now I will change this to be my form data so that I get all this information. In my actions, to avoid confusion, I still only submit the email and password from that bigger object here on sign up. But once we did sign up, I take advantage of the same auth data object, which contains my overall form data, to pass the overall form data, so the whole auth data object here, on to store user. And in store user, I then use the global Axios instance to post this data and store it in the database. Now, let's see if that works. And for that, I will actually, first of all, go back to Firebase, to database there, and then to rules. And I will also switch right to this alternative rule where only authenticated users may write, because the user should be authenticated at this point of time. Now, if we go back to our application here, and I click on sign up and use yet another email address I haven't used before, we can enter whatever we want for all the other fields. Doesn't really matter, it's not checked right now. If I hit submit, I get an error for this post request, even though authentication was successful. Well, the reason for this, of course, is that I don't pass on my token. I'll do that in a second. Before I do that, let me quickly also use global access in fetch user, so that when I fetch the user, we also do that with the global access instance. And there, I also want to store the user data in my store. So I'll add a user field, which is null initially. And then I want to store the first user here. So I want to commit, let's say, store user. This mutation doesn't exist yet. And I want to pass on users 0. I still have my old code, which I set up in the Access module, where I pull out data, transform the object I get back from Firebase, and create an array of users. And then I only store the first user in the store here in the Vuex store. And that, of course, is not really a great app because the first user might not be the active user. But here, I just want to demonstrate how we can access the database. So I'm storing this, I'm calling store user as a mutation. Well, obviously, I need to create that mutation. So store user is created here. It receives the state and the user. And then I just want to set state user equal to user. Finally, with that, I'll add a getter. And in this getter, I want to get the user. And for that, in this user method, where I also receive the state as an argument, as you learned it, I just want to return state user. We can now use this getter in the dashboard. Let's use this getter here with a computed property in the dashboard component. And here I will add a property named email. And on there, I will return this store getters user. And then there will be an email property on that user we stored in the store. If this went a little bit too fast, carefully move through all these files. I'm just using Vuex here to store some data. None of that code will work though. Now, one reason why it won't work is that I never dispatch the fetch user action. So that's the first thing I'll actually do. In the dashboard component, in the created hook, I still want to access my store and dispatch fetch user. But the main reason why none of that will work, even if I change it like this, if I go to dashboard, is of course that I, as you can see by the unauthorized error, that I never attach this token to my requests. Now that is what I talked a lot about though, so let's finally do it in the next lecture. And we'll then also take care about this other error we see here.